In the somber, crowded gallery of the Alte Pinakothek in Munich hangs a canvas that captures the visceral collapse of an era, Peter Paul Rubens' The Massacre of the Innocents. While its biblical title suggests an ancient tragedy, the painting, executed in the shadow of the burgeoning conflict in the Holy Roman Empire, serves as a chilling contemporary mirror to the year 1618. Through its swirling composition of muscular aggression and pale, pleading victims, Rubens does not merely depict a scriptural event, he codifies the terror of the Bohemian Revolt and the subsequent 30 Years' War into a universal language of suffering. This artifact stands as our primary lens into the Defenestration of Prague, an act of localized political defiance that ignited a continental conflagration, transforming the rolling hills of Bohemia into the epicenter of a struggle between the dying breath of medieval religious hegemony and the painful birth of the modern state system. The year 1618 did not arrive in silence. It was preceded by a century of simmering tensions, where the Peace of Augsburg had failed to reconcile the fragmented souls of Europe. The crisis found its focal point in the Radkany Castle in Prague, where the Bohemian estates, fiercely protective of their Protestant liberties under the Letter of Majesty, confronted the representatives of the Catholic King Ferdinand II. When the imperial regents were cast from the castle windows into the dry moat below, the fall was not merely physical but symbolic. It was the moment the fragile equilibrium of Central Europe shattered, signaling that the era of theological debate had ended and the era of total war had begun. This event, captured in numerous contemporary broadsides and etchings, was immediately mythologized. It was portrayed by some as a divine miracle of survival for the Catholic officials, and by others as a desperate, necessary act of resistance against Habsburg tyranny. This duality of interpretation marks the beginning of our journey into a conflict where the lines between faith, power, and survival became indistinguishably blurred, setting the stage for a tragedy that would eventually consume a third of the German-speaking population. As the Bohemian sparks ignited a European wildfire, the nature of war itself underwent a harrowing metamorphosis, a shift documented with unflinching clarity in Jacques Calot's series of etchings, The Great Miseries of War. Created in the immediate wake of the conflict's expansion, Calot's work, specifically the haunting plate The Hanging, moved beyond the romanticized gallantry of earlier military art to expose the systemic dehumanization of the peasantry and the soldier alike. The narrative of 1618 moved from the gilded halls of Prague to the scorched earth of the Palatinate and beyond, as the Swedish lion, Gustavus Adolphus, and the mercenary genius Albrecht von Wallenstein turned the continent into a laboratory of destruction. This period saw the transition from feudal levies to professional, yet predatory, standing armies that lived off the land, a transition that turned every farmstead into a potential battlefield. In the literature of the time, most notably in Hans Jacob Christoffel von Grimmelshausen's Simplicia Simplicissimus, we find the first great German novel born from this chaos. Grimmelshausen's picaresque narrative provides a visceral, ground-level view of a world where social order had collapsed so completely that logic was replaced by luck, and piety by the sheer will to endure. The conflict was no longer a simple duel between Catholic and Protestant, it had evolved into a complex geopolitical chess match involving the Bourbon dynasty of France, the maritime power of the Dutch, and the vast, overextended reach of the Spanish Habsburgs. The human cost was recorded not just in the casualty lists of the Battle of White Mountain or Lutzen, but in the silent, empty villages and the psychological scarring of a generation. Artistic representations from this middle period of the war began to focus on the memento mori, the reminder of death, reflecting a society that felt it was witnessing the literal apocalypse. The Danse Macabre was no longer a medieval allegory but a daily reality. This era of the war solidified the concept of total war avant la lettre, where the distinction between combatant and civilian vanished under the weight of logistical necessity and religious fervor. It was a time when the ink of diplomats could not keep pace with the blood spilled by iron, and the very concept of a unified Christendom began to dissolve into the cold, calculated reality of raison d'etre, the reason of state, which would eventually dictate the terms of a new world order. The resolution of this three-decade agony finally manifested in the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, a diplomatic milestone that remains the bedrock of international relations. The treaties signed in Munster and Osnabrück were more than mere ceasefires, they were the architectural blueprints for the modern sovereign state. by establishing the principle of quaes regio, ius religio, the right of a ruler to dictate the religion of their own realm, and recognizing the legal equality of sovereign entities, the world moved away from the dream of a universal imperial authority. This shift is immortalized in Gerard ter Borch's painting, The Swearing of the Oath of Ratification of the Treaty of Munster. Unlike the chaotic, violent energy of Rubens's early wartime canvases, ter Borch presents a scene of stillness, sobriety, and secular gravity. The focus is no longer on the divine right of kings or the mandates of the heavens, but on the pens, parchment, and collective will of men seeking to codify peace through law rather than blood. The legacy of the 30 Years' War and the Bohemian tragedy endures as a cautionary foundation for global ethics. It taught the Western world the devastating price of ideological absolutism and the necessity of secular pluralism. In the centuries since, the literary and philosophical echoes of 1618 have resonated through the works of Friedrich Schiller and Bertolt Brecht, who look back at this era to understand how humanity survives when the structures of civilization are stripped away. The conflict transformed Europe from a collection of overlapping feudal loyalties into a map of distinct nations, creating the framework for the modern global order while leaving a permanent scar on the collective memory of the continent. We see its reflection in every modern treaty that respects a border and every international body that seeks to mediate belief through dialogue. The embers that began to glow in a Prague castle moat eventually forged the steel of our contemporary political reality, reminding us that the stability we enjoy is built upon the ruins of an era that nearly burned itself into oblivion. We are the inheritors of a peace purchased by the total exhaustion of a continent, forever tethered to the lesson that when we fight for the absolute, we risk losing the essential.